All right, we should be live. Hello, hello. It's Mario from Symbolic Studies. I hope you're doing well. Give me a thumbs up in the chat if you guys can hear me and if you guys can see me. Hope you're doing well. Appropriately, it is hot where I'm at right now. So if you see me sweating, that is why. Let me see who is in the chat so far. What's up, Mr. E and Victor? Thanks for being here. We've got Michael. What's up? We've got my wife, Michelle. Hello, Michelle. You're obligated to be here, but thank you for being here nonetheless. Awesome. Okay, so she's saying I sound good. Excellent. Oh, we've got another Michelle here. Hello, hello. Right. Okay, so there's a number of things I want to talk about today. And it obviously has to do with Leo season and the lion and the symbolism of the lion. There's a couple of books that I want to talk about today. Actually, I'm just going to show you them real quick and then I'll dive into it a little bit more. But this book here is called The Cat in the Mysteries of Magic and Religion here. So I've had this one in my library for a little while. This is originally from 1930. And it's a pretty cool book. There's lots of information in here about the feline and feline symbolism, right? And then I've got another book here called The Cult of the Cat. And this one came out in 1963. And these are awesome little resources. And I've long been planning to really, really dive into them and glean them for information and stuff. And admittedly, I've just been poking around. But at some point, I think I want to read them front to back and do a longer sort of presentation. But at the very least, I wanted to talk about some of the main chapters in there, maybe read some quotes, things like that. Also got some updates for you too with symbolic studies and just there's a lot going on right now. So I figured might as well pop in, say hello, see what's good. And we've got a couple more people here. So exponential potential, what's good? And then JJ, hello, hello. Also, if you have a question, feel free and save it for the end of the presentation or the end of the stream today. I'm going to do a little Q&A and see if I can answer some of those questions for you guys. So just hang tight and I'll get back to the chat room, in a little bit here. Got more people coming in. So I hope you're doing well. Also today, Day of the Sun, right? So really appropriate to talk about Leo symbolism on Sunday. But before we get into things, just want to remind you, for all things symbolic studies, please visit symbolicstudies.com. You can sign up for exclusive content on my site, symbolicstudies.com/secrets. And that gives you access to my Symbolic Secrets series. So right now I'm doing an episode on the Tower card. This is, I believe, the 17th episode that I've done for Symbolic Secrets. So that means that there's basically 17 hours up until now of exclusive content just on my site. And also members get the podcast a week early, right? So I just released the Leo podcast. If you have not heard that, it's now available publicly. And so I think it was a really, really great episode. So shout out to Georgina Rose /darling. And also shout out to Emily Ridout, who were our special guests. If you haven't listened to the podcast yet, I really love the format that we've sort of developed and figured out. And basically, people can submit voicemails. I play them on the air. I do sift through them. But we also reach out to 2 or 3 special guests, and those people submit longer voicemails, about 10 minutes long. And what they're bringing to the table, to me, is really incredible. And so there's been a few people that have kind of become regulars. Emily has become one. You guys might remember Katrina. But I just love listening to these voicemails and then commenting on what they're saying, along with my wife, Michelle, right? And so it's a good time. And I think that this format totally works for me personally. I think it breaks it up. I think it's really interesting. there's so many people that I've met over the years that I can basically contact and ask them to submit something. And a lot of what these special guests are saying to me, it's just top tier sort of information. And so to me, that's the whole thing. I don't want to waste anybody's time with a show or a live stream or whatever. So I like to get to the point, and I like to deliver, as much sort of valuable insights as possible. And so having these people submit the voicemails to me has been really, really fun. It's been really rewarding. So with that said, actually, if you're interested in submitting a voicemail for Virgo, the deadline for that is going to be Saturday, August 23rd. So we're going to be recording it a day or two after that. So if you want to submit something, you can go to my website, once again, symbolicstudies.com, and there's a button. It's a voicemail button. And from there, you could submit a file. You can record it on your phone, submit a file. You can call a number and just leave a voicemail on that number. Or you could just email me as well. But it's all on my website. And so the more, the merrier, definitely. Also, wanted to announce, too, that I'm going to be presenting at the Esoterica conference in October. So October 17th through 19th in Spartanburg, North Carolina, I will be presenting a lecture, a live lecture, for a topic of my choosing. So I haven't even really, I've started thinking of ideas, but I haven't clearly put it together quite yet. But I want to make it worth your while. And generally, my understanding is the event coordinators usually record everything. So I assume at some point that presentation will be available on YouTube somewhere. Also, if they don't, I'm going to record it myself and you guys will be able to see it regardless. But, doing live presentations, it's the best. So you may not be aware, but even before I started Symbolic Studies, I was doing presentations in person for a limited audience. And there's really just no substitute for it. I feel as though I'm really in the zone. I feel more relaxed than when I'm just talking to myself and looking at myself on a screen, right? But doing it in person, there's just something really rewarding and fulfilling about it. I'm also going to be doing some readings while I'm there. It's going to be very, very limited, if I'm being honest with you. So I'll probably schedule, maybe somewhere between like 3 and 6 readings or something like that. I don't want to bombard myself with sessions and not be able to, just hang out with other people and maybe watch some of these presentations and whatnot. I'll say too, doing readings in person is sort of, I have the same sentiment pretty much. It really, really makes a huge difference. I love connecting with people however I can. Obviously, I do a lot of tarot readings and sessions and things like that online, and that's great. But being able to be in the same room with somebody and being able to just connect on that level is really something special, and I think that there is a whole different sort of dynamic when I'm doing that. So whoever gets the opportunity to get a reading, I just want to say that, like, I'm looking forward to meeting you, and that this is sort of, in my opinion, this is like a very special sort of circumstance. So whenever I can just connect with people in person, that's just the way to go. So if you want more information on that conference, go to esoterica.world, and you should be able to find more information there. I'm not certain, but I'm assuming that I'm going to be speaking on Saturday. As soon as I have confirmation on that, I'll let everybody know. Also, in case I didn't mention it, that exclusive content on my site, Symbolic Secrets and whatnot, that's also available on Patreon. So you get the same thing on my site or on Patreon. I try and do a weekly update basically every weekend. I post recent appearances, updates on the channel, etc. And then every other week you get something exclusive, whether it's the podcast early or you get Symbolic Secrets or whatnot. Also have to mention the fact that I'm a graphic designer, and really design work is what keeps Symbolic Studies afloat. And so I've mentioned that before, but that's what's funding sort of this operation. What I bring in for Symbolic Studies definitely help, or with Symbolic Studies, it definitely helps. But design work is my bread and butter. That's actually how I found symbolism. So if you have a project and you think that I would be a good fit for your project and you're looking for maybe a designer who is more symbolically literate, hit me up. And if it's a good fit, it's a good fit. All right. So I think that's most of what I wanted to get through as far as sort of plugs in the beginning are concerned. Let me see what's going on in the chat before I dive into these books here. All right. What's up? Oh, cool. Yeah, you should definitely check it out. It should be a good time. I'm really looking forward to it. And actually, it was pretty cool because literally just 2 or 3 days before I got the invitation, I think it was my last live stream for cancer. And I said, hey, I want to do more events. I want to meet people. I want to just basically be more public that way and travel. And then this opportunity came at me like a few days later. So it was like perfect timing. I kind of put it out there in the universe and then I got the invitation. All right. Hello, Debbie. What's good? Megan, hello. Oh, awesome. Happy to hear that. Thank you for being here. Hey, Louie, what's up? Thanks for hanging out today. Yeah, it's cool. One of the things I have to say, Megan, thanks for saying that. Having done this for a number of years now, in case you're not aware, I've been doing this since 2020. So for a year or two before 2020, so starting around 2018, I was really getting into the symbolism of the signs. And I kind of made it, I don't know, just a routine for me to look into each sign during the sign itself. And then I also started illustrating a poster or print for each sign. And at a certain point, I decided that I really need to just put some of this information together, package it up, put it online, started Symbolic Studies. And because you're just starting, you don't have that much traction. And so there was a lot of stuff that I put out early on that hardly got any views. And then it's just been cool over time because I've built up sort of this archive of presentations and videos and whatever. It's awesome. There's a lot of people now that are finding my work that are now digging through everything. So stuff that I made years ago, it's kind of finding its audience now after all these years. So I've been getting this a lot. People saying that they just found me and now they're going through a bunch of my work. So that's really, really awesome. Very, very happy to hear that for sure. Okay, so what are we going to dive into? We're going to get into these books, and then I'm going to talk about basically sort of deeper insights that I've gotten lately regarding Leo symbolism and what it's all about. And in particular, I'll say that the heart has really come through for me very strongly. So that is sort of the main correspondence that people associate with Leo is the heart. And to me, that is really fascinating and interesting. And it sounds as though that's just really basic, right? Sort of the body correspondence with with the signs, excuse me. That sounds like it's really, just like 101 sort of stuff. And it is. But a lot of things that are simple like that, a lot of things that are fundamental have such depth to them that you can really unpack them, kind of in a very, very deep way, right? And I would say that there's new information that's coming to me regarding Leo's correspondence with the heart. And once again, I have to give a shout out to Emily Ridout because that was one of the focuses with her voicemail on the last episode. And there's just a few things that she mentioned that got me thinking about other things. And then just kind of reviewing some heart information. I'm like, wow, this is such a beautiful fit. The lion, the sign of Leo, corresponding with the heart, and sort of this royal connection with Leo also relates to the heart as well. It's even been referred to as the royal organ, right? And so there's a lot of things associated with the heart with sort of kingship and kingdoms and things of that sort. So I want to unpack a bit of that and talk about sort of axial symbolism as well, how it relates to the heart, how it relates to Leo, and things like that. Also, I have a couple of personal stories that I want to share, just experiences that remind me of my relationship with Leo as well. So 2 of the bigger sort of events in my life revolve around Leo or feline symbolism, funny enough. And so I thought this is the perfect time to sort of talk about that. And this is spanning way, way back, you know. So I think it's appropriate just to discuss what's going on in that regard, because there's a lot of signs where I do not have that relationship. I don't have these like sort of go-to events that I think of with I don't know, Virgo as an example, but with Leo, there's a couple that really, really stick with me and are worth relaying, I think. So I want to get to that, and then of course after that I'll do some questions and answers. So let's talk about this first book here. This is Cult of the Cat, and this was written by Patricia Dale Green. And as I mentioned earlier, from 1963, really, really cool book. To be honest, I can't remember exactly. Michelle might remember where we got these books. Either they were gifted to us from a friend, or perhaps we picked them up at a thrift store or something like that. I think the second book here actually was a gift. I can't recall where the first one came from, but they've been hanging out in our library for a while. And I always tell myself that I need to talk about them. I think cat people would love it. It's perfect for Leo season. And so they were kind of eyeballing me over the last couple of weeks, that I need to at least share what's going on here, right? So just to even get into it, you might be interested in picking this up, but this book is divided into two parts. So part one is called The White Cat or White Cat. And then part two is about the Black Cat. And then there's also part three, which is the medium. And then part four, which is the symbol, where it really gets into the symbolic value of the cat. But I just want to read just to kind of, you know, talk about what's, you know, in here. I want to talk about the different sections just to give you an idea of what's happening here. So there's a section about the cat being the deity, the sun, the moon, the immortal, the seer, the healer, the hunter, which I did read that section last night, the mother, the seed, the virgin. Very interesting. I've done so much work relating line symbolism with virgin symbolism and Virgo symbolism. It's not a coincidence. It's not a mistake that Leo is right next to Virgo, and they have a huge deep weave together. If you want to know more about that, you should check out my The Lion and the Virgin presentation that I gave either last year or the year before. And lines have just been basically connected with virgin symbolism for a really, really, really long time. And a lot of queen symbolism is basically Virgo symbolism, right? And so the queen of heaven, right? There's a reason why so many queens have been associated with cats and will have cats, you know, on their throne or something along these lines. There's multiple myths that this relates to, and really they're kind of inseparable. So even when we enter into Leo season, I'm immediately thinking about Virgo and how Virgo relates to the lion. And if you've never heard this before, this is sort of a weave that you can look into. But at one point in time in ancient Egypt, the beginning of the year was actually Virgo season, and the end of the year was Leo season. And so this in totality basically created their yearly cycle, right? Just like what we have today. We have Aries is the beginning of the year associated with the head, and then it goes all through the zodiac, and then it ends with Pisces. At one point in time, it was Virgo and Leo, and they say that actually this is one of the sort of riddles of the Sphinx, of the Great Sphinx. And some people have made the claim that the Great Sphinx is actually a culmination of Virgo and Leo, that the head is Virgo and the body is Leo. And so the head, right, the beginning, head symbolism always, you know, relates to the beginning of things, right? We're born into this reality head first. You know, to have a head start is to be able to begin in front before other people, right? And so the head is Virgo, the beginning of the year, and then it ends with Leo. So the tail of the lion is sort of associated with that, the tail ending of something, right? And so there's a whole deep, deep weave that you can really dive into as it relates the lion to the virgin. And yeah, there's music videos that relate to this. Watch that presentation. I get into a lot of different aspects with it. But once you know, you know. And once you see it, you kind of can't unsee it. And basically, even too, like in the Egyptian Dendera zodiac, you have the depiction of Leo, and Leo's tail is being held by a woman. And the woman actually has a flail with her. And so she is actually in control, right? So she is more primary, and she is actually above the lion, that the lion essentially is subordinate to her. The lion, in many ways, it's kind of like the sun, right? Leo would be the symbolic sun, and then Virgo is the symbolic mother. So it's really just a mother and child relationship, no different than the Virgin and child. So the Virgin Mary, right? And of course, Virgin Mary symbolism relates very strongly to Virgo symbolism. And so then we also call Christ, the Son. And isn't it interesting that Son, S-U-N, and S-O-N have a lot of overlapping symbolism together, right? So just wanted to mention some of that, right? So they have a whole section here on the Virgin, right? The talisman, the charm, the cat as the musician, the servant, the sacrifice. And that concludes part 1. Part 2, we have the black cat. We've got the circle, the devourer, the witch, the familiar, the devil. So obviously appropriate stuff for the black cat section. Just like the serpent, the serpent, depending on the culture, is either revered or feared, or both, even, right? That the serpent has these qualities to it that make it worth following or wanting to sort of understand or learn from, right? Serpents have been called very wise, be wise as serpents, or they've been looked at as being very devilish and demonic, and there's something to sort of be avoided. So that is largely in play during the season as well, because the lion essentially, like, are you being protected by the lion? Are you being attacked by a lion? In a lot of ways, it just reminds me of classic sort of king symbolism or leader symbolism, right? The king, if he's righteous and he is positive and he's a positive influence on the people, that's a beautiful thing. It can be a beautiful thing, at least, to have a leader that the people believe in and gives them sort of a point of pivot, a point of orientation. Or if that king is tyrannical and corrupt, then that obviously can be very devastating and detrimental to the people. And so the lion has both of this symbolism sort of intact, right? Either this sort of righteous, regal, royal, upstanding, sort of noble, king-like sort of creature, or devilish, hellish, demonic. In some ways, it's no different than the sun. I mentioned this recently as well. Obviously the sun has a lot of life-giving properties associated with it. And, we all have to give thanks to the sun, of course. We all have an intimate relationship with the sun, and the sun is necessary, right? But on the other hand, too, if you live in a desert, it could be the thing that kills you. It's too hot, it's too dry. I just saw a video of some guys in some African desert, and they came across these bodies, in the middle of the desert, three guys, and sand is blowing over them. And you could tell, obviously, they got dehydrated and probably delirious and everything else, couldn't make their way out. So the sun can be a scorcher. The sun basically can be a life-giving source, is a life-giving source, and is also a destroyer, and everything in between. So a lot of times when you're breaking down these deities or these planets, there's sort of this like savior dynamic, there's this preserver dynamic, and then there's also this destroyer dynamic. All these things really relate to the serpent, relate to the lion, relate to the sun as well, and so many other things. So we have the demon, the vampire, super appropriate. Even just think of vampire teeth and cat teeth, right? The bewitcher, the traitor. That's interesting as well, because I just recently read that there's some paintings that associate Judas, who is the traitor of Christ, being associated with a cat, that sometimes he would be illustrated with a cat nearby. and if I'm not mistaken, actually a black cat. And so this traitor sort of dynamic comes through as well, for sure. And so even people just having a disdain for cats and felines, to me, that's always surprising because I'm such a cat guy. And Michelle is a cat girl, a cat woman. And, people just have this fear, this innate fear of cats, and they want to poison them or kill them, and, all these other things. And so this is just something that is kind of inseparable with the cat, that it's always sort of been like that, right? So this traitor or trickster dynamic, definitely is in play here. The black cat as the fighter, and then also the victim. And then for the part 3 here, the medium section, we have the cat as the bridge. Very interesting. And it relates to the cat as the psychopomp. So that to me was really intriguing. And I did read that chapter as well. This idea that some cultures basically have viewed the cat as a psychopomp. So basically a guide of souls, right? That the cat will take you to the afterlife, has been, between worlds. And that's another thing with felines, right? That felines have this sort of thing with them that people have said that they have a extra sensory sort of insight, extra perceptions, that they're highly intuitive, that they can pick up on subtle energy and things like that, right? So this idea of cat as psychopomp, as being sort of this guide of souls, to me was very, very fascinating. And I can absolutely see that being the case. And of course, there's like deities that associate with that as well. Part 4, this is the cat as the symbol. So the sections here include, when did cats receive their power? They address that here. What have people believed about cats? Why have they believed these things? And how does the cat archetype operate in us? And then under that section, or just after, there are sections for the cat's eyes, cat and mouse, cat and snake, cat and kitten, cat and black magic as well. And then their final section here is man and the cat. So there you go. If you're looking for your cat fix, Cult of the Cat, maybe worth looking out for, right? So, there's illustrations in here as well, and paintings and things like that. And rest assured, when I do dive into it one day and really, really get into things, I will share my findings with you all. So there you go. Cult of the Cat. And here's the cover once again. And, being a bibliophile, I just love these old books. So we also have the cat in the mysteries of religion and magic. And this one was written by W. Oldfield Howey. Interestingly enough, there are some versions of this book that say it's M. Oldfield Howey, and that it was written by a woman, and her name was Mary. And so I don't know what actually is the right way that she likes to go by, if she's a W or an M. And so even, I think it's kind of interesting that on the cover here, it's W, but then on the spine here, it's M. So not sure what's up with that. But really cool book as well. And just wanted to basically do the same thing and show you guys some of the chapters, read off some of the chapters, and maybe riff on a couple of things here and there. So there's a whole chapter on Bast, a whole chapter on Sekhmet, the Sistrum, the cat and the serpent. Obviously, that's such a huge weave. Probably, one of my favorite all-time videos is my video about the cat's relationship with serpents and dragons, right? And this is preserved in so many different things, but you take the Hebrew letter of the strength card, that's Tet or Teth, that means serpent, or it also means vessel as well, right? And so I'm glad that they acknowledged it in here. The cat and the riddle of Isis, the cat in Chaldean and Egyptian magic, Freya and her cats, Christ and the cat, Once again, if I haven't said it today, actually, Christ was the Lion of Judah. So that to me is really interesting. I'm definitely going to read that chapter. The Virgin and the Cat, you can't not talk about it once you start diving into feline symbolism. The May Kitten, the Corn Cat, the Cat and the Sabbat, witches in cat form, witch cats and repercussion, secret sex and cat worship, the cat as sacrifice, the cat and transmigration, as in the transmigration of souls, as in the cat as psychopomp, basically. The temple cat, animated cat images, the cat in the necropolis, the cat in paradise. That's interesting. Ghostly cats. We've got demon cats, vampire cats, cat genie and familiars, or genii, it looks like, and familiars, cat as omen of death, clairvoyant cats, cats in telepathy, the cat as phallic symbol. That resonates, actually, because there's a whole deep weave. This is partly what I want to talk about. There's a huge weave with Leo and Virgo and pillar symbolism. And that's some of what I got into in that presentation, the Lion and the Virgin, is when you start diving into it, there are a number of myths that relate to Leo and also relate to the pillar. And I'll just give you one example here. So the strength card, right? Generally, it looks like this. I've got one of them right here. So this is the classic Rider-Waite deck. And clearly you see what looks to me like Virgo and Leo, right? That this card is really about these two signs and their relationship. In my estimation, everything points in that direction, right? Well, this version of the card is just one of a couple of different classic takes on the card. So I know I have a version here. There we go. So this is from the Montaigne deck, much, much older deck. But look at this version. Right? Very different. You still have a lion that's being submissive, right, in the background. And you have a powerful woman. That's part of the symbolism. But notice that she is basically right there with that broken pillar. And the broken pillar is almost kind of like another figure here, right? It's like a main character in this card. And there's a number of older strength cards that depict this broken pillar. And I used to talk about it all the time, but we have the Freemasonic illustration called the Weeping Virgin. And the Weeping Virgin is right in front of a broken pillar. And it's very obvious that this is Virgo, right? And behind her is Saturn, Father Time, Kronos. And the broken pillar is kind of this ominous sort of cryptic sort of thing, right? But once you dive into it, you realize that this is a classic sort of connection. This connection between Virgo and pillar, and also line symbolism and pillar symbolism. And there's a really good reason for that, actually. So I'm going to dive into that after I talk about these books here. And so basically, the cat as phallic symbol very much relates to that. And there's a lusty, very lusty aspect to the lion, for sure. And so this fondness for virgins that the lion has, it's kind of twofold. On one hand, it's related to this protection of innocence, protection of purity, things like that. More of a guardian, and the lion has a lot of guardian symbolism associated with it as well, as does the dragon, and also the serpent can play that role too. But this idea of guardians, is definitely in play. And so he's either the guardian of a virgin and protects her, or he is that corrupt aspect and he wants her, right? And he wants to sleep with her, essentially. So that's in play as well. So the cat as a phallic symbol, there's multiple ways of thinking about that. The pillar, polar, phallic, axis sort of dynamic as well, which relates to phallic symbolism. Or, like I said, this sort of sexual lusty aspect. Let's not forget the strength card, in some esoteric decks, if I have it here, is referred to as lust, right? So this is Lon Milo Duquette's deck, and you can see here that it is basically it's the Whore of Babylon riding the Demiurge. But there you go. It's called Lust right there. And I've got something in my fingernail there, but it's all good. All right, so here we go. The Crowley version. Boom. So it's called Lust. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot to be said about that. So also, as it relates to, the Whore of Babylon, whore and virgin, two sides of the same coin. And there's a lot of overlapping symbolism, between the two. And in the Crowley world, and in Thelemic magic and things like that, the Whore of Babylon is a pretty big deal. And actually, this kind of relates to the idea that, it just relates to something that I've been wanting to talk about for a long time. And I think I'm ready to do a presentation on the Whore of Babylon. And I think I'm going to do it during Virgo season because there's so much to talk about and there's so much to unpack there. And so, spoiler alert, I think the case can be made that she's a northern goddess. She's a northern polar goddess. Pretty convinced of that. When we're talking about the pole here, we're talking about the world axis, right? So this would be the symbolic spiritual axis that extends from the North Pole to the North Star, aka. And so many symbols go back to this sort of basic framework, of this pole or axis that extends through all sort of levels of reality, right? But I'll save some of that for when I talk about axial heart symbolism, because that's all related too. But the Whore of Babylon, worth discussing. This is the time, in my opinion, to talk about the Virgin, the Whore, the Demiurge, all this stuff, Leo season, Virgo season. It's all very much in play. So the cat as charm and talisman, the symbology of cat and mouse, the cat in heraldry, the cat's 9 lives. That's really interesting too. In fact, one of the symbols for Leo it looks basically like the number 9. So I did a short where I broke down the Leo glyph. The Leo glyph, along with the Capricorn glyph, in my opinion, there's probably more variations of those two glyphs than I think any other glyph in the zodiac, right? So Capricorn, there's so many different versions. Leo, there's so many different versions. But one of the versions that is lesser known is basically a 9, that in some schools of thought, they actually use sort of this number 9 glyph to represent Leo. Isn't that interesting? The 9 lives of the cat, right? So I don't know the history behind it so much, but I did mention it in that video. So the cat's 9 lives, that's interesting. The cat's nomenclature, that is the last chapter there. All right, so there you have it, the cat in the mysteries of religion and magic. There's a few things that this book reminded me of that I had read before. And, when you read so much, obviously you can't retain all of it. You're going to forget stuff. And one of the things that it reminded me of is the story of the, I guess, Christian interpretation of where house cats came from. And so if you've never heard it, I think it's a charming story. And basically, their story with the feline, with the average normal house cat, is that supposedly there was no cat before the Great Flood. That's what's been said, is that there was no house cat before the Great Flood. Noah built his ark, right? And he collected 2 of every animal. This included lions, and this also included mice and also rats. And so he basically ran into a situation because the mice and the rats were multiplying like crazy. And so that's a big problem. If you have a massive ark made out of wood and all this other stuff, they can create a lot of issues. And so Noah went to the lions and asked them, hey, is there anything you guys can do about this rat problem? You guys are the king of beasts, right? The king of the jungle. Can something be done here? Can you think of anything? And what happened is that the lion sneezed, and out of its nostrils came out two house cats. And these house cats took care of the infestation of mice and rats. And so to me, that's a really fun story, and like I said, I completely forgot about that, but I think that's interesting. I love all of the different takes, of world religions and stuff and how they explain certain things. And so that's one explanation for the house cat. So in case you weren't aware, your house cat is the product of a lion sneezing, right? Um, I was also reminded too of the myth of Buddha and Buddha's funeral, and how all of the animals in the animal kingdom were invited to Buddha's funeral. And they all showed up. They all showed up except for one animal, and it was the cat. The cat did not show up to the funeral. Any guesses why the cat didn't show up to the funeral? It's because he got distracted by a mouse. And so the cat had all of the intentions of going, but this mouse distracted the cat, which is so cat-like. I love it, right? And that's one of the things too, just flipping through these books. There's a lot to be said even about the relationship the cat has with the mouse. Notice the two things that I mentioned here, Noah's Ark, and then also Buddha's funeral. The mouse played a part in all of this. In one of these two books, it even said that the house cat is a creation of God and the mouse is a creation of the devil. And so there's this sort of really interesting interplay, between cat and mouse. And, if you've ever been around a cat that is a great hunter, you're going to be probably being given mice at some point, or moles or other critters, right? And so we had a cat on our property not too long ago, and they were only here for a few months, but they were amazing at hunting, and they would bring us gifts and everything else. And it's really fun to see just how they stalk, and how patient they are and everything else. And it's just clearly in their blood to do this. And so they've kind of become inseparable in some ways, the cat and the mouse, or the rat. And so some of these chapters really, really dive into that whole entire dynamic symbolically, like what's going on, with the cat and with the mouse. And there's a number of myths that make use of this as well. There was something along the lines of a boy. I can't even remember where it came from. I think it was an Eastern myth where this younger boy, or this young man, that he was infatuated with his cat, loved his cat. He wished more than anything for his cat to become a beautiful woman and become his wife or girlfriend. And that happened. His wish was granted. And upon doing so, he fell in love with her, all this stuff. And then she left him because she too got distracted by a mouse. And so, to me, it's just hilarious because that relationship, I don't know, there's something about it that definitely makes me smile. But symbolically, it's very potent. There's a whole lot going on there. So yeah, so there you go. I think that's it for the books. Just wanted to put those books on your radar. If you get them, let me know what you think. I'm going to check the chat here and see what's going on. Oh, cool. What's up, Emily? Nice to see you here. Oh, okay, awesome. So Michelle posted that presentation. Thank you, my dear. I actually just listened to it today, and there's a few things that I got from it. I listen to my own presentations, and I forget so much stuff that it really helps refresh my memory on some things. All right, so new faces here. Danielle, hello. People from X are here. What's good? X/Twitter. Oh, Kat and Catherine. Yeah, that's interesting. All right. Hello, hello. Okay, guys. So I don't want to spend too much time scrolling through here, but just wanted to see what's going on. Sean, Ishtar was associated with lions in Babylonian religion. Yep, definitely. It's really amazing, actually, how many goddesses and sort of queens and stuff like that have this very strong connection to felines and to the lion. Way more than I initially sort of realized, I think. Hey there, Sarah. What's up, Samantha? Thanks for being here. Also, I'm just going to plug too that Michelle, she actually wrote a PDF on holistic cat care. I think it's been maybe 2 or 3 years since she wrote it. And originally it was a digital download. And she really put together some high quality information about how to take care of your pets. And especially, obviously, if you want to go the holistic route with everything. And I've said this before, but she really extended like my cat's life, which basically became her cat. And so I feel as though I acted as a sort of bridge or medium to really get these two together. My cat, Carl, and then Michelle. And so when Carl was, brought into her life, kind of around the same time, he really started developing pretty bad asthmatic issues, amongst other things. And so we always called him like a special needs sort of cat. And Michelle did a lot of research about what herbs would help him, the proper way to kind of create a tincture at just all sorts of different things. So for years and years and years, Carl. All right. I think I cut out there, but I should be back. At least hopefully I'm back. Let me see. If I'm back, give me a thumbs up. And so she created a lot of really great remedies for Carl, basically. And she put together this PDF, and I think we should just give it away to people if they want it. So if you guys email me, symbolicstudies@gmail.com, and you guys are looking for something along these lines, a way to help your cat in, whatever with whatever they might be dealing with, excuse me, because she has stuff related to like fleas, she has stuff related to asthma, oral care, if I'm not mistaken. She has recommendations for food and whatnot, and a lot of this stuff is like DIY. You can do it yourself. I think that'd be like a perfect sort of thing to honor, Leo season and the cat and whatever. So she agrees. She thinks this is a good idea. All right. So just email me symbolicstudies@gmail.com and just let me know that you want that PDF and we'll send it to you because it should just get out there anyway. And she's always down to help out cats. She's a very big cat lover. And so I had a feeling that she would approve of that. Alrighty. So let's talk about this heart connection with Leo. And like I said, it sounds like it's basic information, but it's a very, very deep, potent weave. And what I'm learning too is like the fundamentals of anything take actually the longest to explain. And that it takes a lot of skill to explain simple things efficiently and effectively as well, right? I was just talking to a client about this, about condensing lots of ideas or a spectrum of concepts, into one thing, or how do you distill down a lot of information, into something that's very, very simple. That's actually very, very hard, and not everyone is good at doing that. And it takes a lot of energy to want to know the fundamentals with things as well. And just the older I get, the more I learn about symbolism, the more I appreciate fundamental symbolism, and the more I appreciate people who speak about fundamental symbolism. So people know that I've been going on about Rene Guénon, and Rene Guénon is, basically a very proficient symbologist, amongst other things, and metaphysician and philosopher and whatnot. But he has books just on like very basic symbols. So he has a whole book on the cross, as an example, the symbolism of the cross. You think the cross is pretty basic, you see the cross all over the place, but man, when you really break down what it means, it's very, very powerful, and it's very transcendental as well. And that's actually partly what's related to the heart, right? So kind of in tandem with this, I just want to mention something that Emily mentioned on the last podcast. And she brought up actually the correspondence that Leo relates to not only the heart, but also the spine. And so to me, that was really well taken. And that's something that I don't think I've come across too much. It might be in one of my resources here. But that's not often sort of what's said. Usually the heart is what's clearly emphasized. But wouldn't you know it, guys? The heart actually has a correspondence and a relationship with the spine or the column, which are synonymous, in my opinion. So once again, it's interesting. We're dealing with pillar symbolism. The pillar symbolism that's baked into this card, that's baked into other aspects related to Leo and Virgo. So here's how it all sort of like breaks down and how I kind of see it. So the lion, as it relates to the heart, the heart clearly has a relationship with blood. The heart symbolically is considered to be one of our main centers of the human body. Center symbolism is extraordinarily deep because everything goes back to it. Everything has a center. And so that's sort of my framework these days, is that everything is expressed from a center and then also returns back to that same center. And the center is also everywhere. And there's so many symbols that relate to the center that you kind of can't escape it. And so in some ways, sort of where my research has taken me with symbolism, the concept of the center is fundamental pretty much. And when you start looking into basic fundamental symbols, you'll see that a lot of them have this relationship with this sort of center, right? So whether you're looking at the wheel or the tree, you're looking at the mountain, the column, you're looking at the dot. That's one of my classic examples, is that the dot on one hand represents a point of pivot, right? Just a very simple dot. Can you get even a simpler glyph or icon? I don't think you really can. So you have the simple dot, right? This point in space. On one hand, that dot represents a point of pivot. And so it represents an axis, right? It represents, the point in which things revolve around or rotate around. And so it's the center of a thing, the same way the axle is the center of a wheel, right? The dot is also, though, a symbol of the totality of everything. So on one hand, the dot represents the universe itself. It represents the cosmos, but it also represents the center of the cosmos as well, right? And so a lot of symbols actually have this exact same dynamic. The tree is a really good one. We have this idea of a world tree, right? And then you have the trunk that goes between the different realms, as though, or just in case you've never heard me mention this before, but my understanding is there are realms above and below, as above, so below, and they're all connected through their center. And the center is sort of the bridge between these realms. And you can imagine even our chakra system is working in a very similar way. You have 7 chakras. You have 7 wheels. Chakra means disc or wheel. You have these 7 discs or wheels, and they're all connected through their center. And your spine, going back to spine symbolism, your spine is the symbolic axis or bridge between the chakras, between these different realms, right? And so the center is the transcendental point of any system. And so when you look at a cross, I just brought it up, right? But you have the cross and you have the 4 arms that emanate from the center. And so you have the 4 quadrants, right, that the cross sort of divides. The transcendental part of the cross would be the middle part, and that would be the 5th point, right? The number 5. And so you have the 4 arms or the 4 quadrants, but every single shape has a relationship with its hidden center. So there's a natural relationship with the cross and the number 5 as an example, because it represents that point in the middle, that symbolic point of pivot, right? It's not uncommon in like the Western esoteric world. I'm thinking of like Rosicrucianism as an example. It's not uncommon to have like a cross, and then there's that rose in the middle of the cross where the vertical and horizontal axes meet. And so the middle is the point of transcendence. It is the pinnacle of the hierarchy as well. So as an example with the wheel, to use the wheel metaphor again, the highest point or the most transcendental point, or basically if we're talking about, you know, an actual real hierarchy. And hierarchy is such an interesting thing to consider these days, because people, modern people, Western people, have this idea of like this horizontal sort of reality where they want everyone to be on an equal playing field. And on many levels, I get it. But on a spiritual, symbolic level, there is a true hierarchy. You know, that there's literally, there are things that descend from a common point. There is a monad, you know, there is a singular whole that everything sort of emanates from, right? With the wheel, it would be the center. So the outside of the wheel would be related to multiplicity, division, you know, that's kind of more the material world. But the top of the hierarchy would actually be the center itself, right? So the top of any hierarchy, or the center of any hierarchy, you know, usually relates to like this unifying sort of aspect, you know, this unifying principle, if you want to put it that way. And so every system has this center, and arguably the center of the human body symbolically is the heart itself. And so this is kind of a tangent here, but a lot of people talk about mental health today and mental health issues, right? In many ways, it's kind of become a buzzword. And so a lot of people are basically making reference to it. A lot of people are going to therapy for it. And I've seen a lot of videos and I've consumed a lot of content that relates to mental health. And at a certain point, in my opinion, what I realized was that mental health, refer to it as mental health, is actually something of a misdirection. That I think a lot of people who say that they suffer from mental health issues, actually, it's not really their mental state that is the problem. It's actually their emotional body, and it's actually more of an emotional issue. And so it's more of a heart-based issue is what I'm trying to say. And so what has happened, from my understanding, is that modern man tends to overemphasize the intellect or the mind. And now it's sort of devalued the heart. And so where modern people feel as though where we think our like center is right here. And a lot of people feel as though symbolically they can just use their mind and they can use their brain and they can sort of reason and logic their way through life. And so everything is being filtered through their mind, but they're actually suppressing their heart impulse. And really, the heart, in my opinion, is the home of your spirit, you know? So if there's a dwelling place for your spirit, symbolically, it's the heart, in my opinion. And so the heart is actually not a pump. I talked about that on the last episode of the podcast. And it's actually more of an electromagnetic like organ that has all of this toroidal symbolism associated with it. And so there's a lot of videos that you can look into about this. So all you have to do is Google "heart is not a pump." And it's just not mechanical the way that we've been taught it's mechanical. In fact, it's a long tubular muscle that basically wraps unto itself. And so it creates this sort of knot, basically. And not symbolism actually relates to heart symbolism as well. You know, when we're feeling emotional, we might say that our heartstrings are being pulled, right? And so this relates to the knot symbolism and the rope and everything else. And so blood is pumped away from the heart, and then it also returns back to the heart, right? And so there's this toroidal sort of dynamic, you know, with the heart and everything it represents. And so the torus field has that sacred center. It has that holy of holies, is the point of expression, but then it's also the point of return as well, right? And so the heart is the seat of our spiritual impulse. And over time, it seems as though we now basically associate thinking with our mind. But ancient peoples used to say that they would think with their heart, you know, and there's something to be said as well with thinking with your gut, you know. And so we don't just exclusively think from our minds, you know, our heart plays a factor as well. Today, we generally see the heart being associated with our emotions, but there is actually an older correspondence that relates it to our intellect as well. And so the heart being the center also relates it to it being the central chakra as well, if you're going by the 7 chakra system. And so the color associated with the heart is green. And so, like what I was saying earlier, the heart has all of this royal symbolism associated with it as well. So the heart has been referred to as the throne of God, or that the kingdom of God is within, or it's within the heart itself. It's been referred to as the royal organ, right? It's been referred to the heart specifically as the temple or altar of God. And it has this huge relationship with the Holy of Holies. And so whenever you're referring to the Holy of Holies, it's the inner sanctum of a thing. And so it's the inner sanctum of a thing that should be protected. And oftentimes, that inner sanctum is the transcendental part of whatever system you're talking about. And so, you know, there's many examples of this, but the first one that comes to mind is the symbolism of Solomon's temple, if you've never heard of it. You know, Solomon's temple has this courtyard, and there's a wall around the courtyard. And so there's the outer space outside of the courtyard, but then there's the inner space of what's within the courtyard. Within that courtyard, there is literally the temple itself. And then within the temple, there's another section within the temple. And then within that section, there's another section within that. And there may be one more layer to this, or that could be it. But there is the Holy of Holies in the middle of this temple. And so there's this perpetual sort of inner sanctum penetration that you're getting when you're thinking about being on the very outside of the temple and working your way sort of inward. Our heart symbolically represents that innermost sort of place, that Holy of Holies. And so a lot of symbolism goes back to this. There's a lot of older labyrinths that basically look circular, you know, in nature. And sometimes when you look at these labyrinths, there's actually 7 layers from outer to inner, and that there's this process. It's almost alchemical, basically, the different veils from outer to inner. And when you are in the middle of the labyrinth, you are at that Holy of Holies. You're at that inner sanctum. Our heart has this really beautiful correspondence with that. And so there's a lot of alchemical processes that basically suggest that you should go to your inner sanctum. You should go to the still point within. You should go to your center. And I've said this before, but, you know, the center of self is connected to the center of earth, is connected to the center of the cosmos, right? And so the heart really is the bridge. It's the way, pretty much. And we as humans, we filter things more through our emotional body first than anything else. So if somebody delivers news, good or bad, you're going to probably relate to that information on an emotional level first, and then you'll think about it. But everything is filtered through our emotional body. So it's really, really important to kind of realize that mental health is definitely a thing. There are people with mental health issues, but my personal opinion is I'm willing to kind of bet that the vast majority of people who talk about mental health, they actually are dealing with more of an emotional health issue, right? That I've seen so many videos of people talking about this stuff, and I'm like, mentally they're fine, they're just fine. It's emotional though. That's the hardest stuff to deal with, right? You're dealing with invisible wounds and traumas and things like that, and none of us go through this life unscathed that way, right? I'm kind of reminded of Chiron and the wounded healer sort of dynamic, right? And so our emotional sort of state, our emotional wellness, I think really is should be more of the topic of conversation, right? And the reason why, another reason why I think that this is partly the case is because a lot of people, to me, the misdirection with mental health in some ways has to do with the fact that a lot of people do not want to address the spiritual side of things, and they don't want to address their soul. They don't want to address, what's happening metaphysically, so kind of basically saying or suggesting that everything is all just mental and has nothing to do with the heart or with the emotions or with spirit. I think there's going to be a lot left on the table, if you don't address things this way personally, because your emotions, they're very mysterious, right? And so a lot of men, as an example, suppress their emotions. And so they don't want to acknowledge what's happening in that regard. You can hear a song, you can watch a movie, you can see a painting or read a poem, and suddenly you're feeling it, right? You're feeling moved or you're feeling touched in some way. So that is a very sort of delicate thing to deal with. And there's a lot of mystery there because you're not going to get clear answers. And so what sort of the modern mind does with science is it wants to give us clear answers for everything. And it likes to say that there's answers for everything and that we kind of all have it figured out. And in my opinion, this is almost denying the mysteries in a way, the mystery of spirit and of life and things like that. I'm becoming more aware that there are many, many aspects to all of these things that can absolutely be known. But also I have this opinion that how much are we supposed to know? That just as humans living our life with the amount of time we have here, there's going to be things that we just don't understand, right? And so the realm of occultism and esoterica and things like that, a lot of that stuff has to do with, the mysterious side of life, what happens after death, what's going on with spirits or, all of these things. A lot of it has to do with like very mercurial sort of like liminal things, right? Things that aren't easily seen or understood or known or whatever you might want to say. And when it comes to the emotions operate sort of in that world, in that realm, right? Not exactly visible, not exactly seen, not exactly sort of brought to light, right? And so to me, to deny sort of your heart impulse or your spiritual impulse is very, very detrimental. I'm a Cancer sun sign, so of course I'm going to feel this way, because there's a huge aspect related to the emotions with water. Obviously, in the tarot, your emotions correspond with cup symbolism. In ancient Egypt, the heart glyph was basically a vase, right? So even when you just think about the vessel, you think about a vessel, you think about a container, right? There's infinite possibilities of what's contained within that vessel. Just like with Aquarius symbolism, Aquarius is the water bearer. Within the vessels of Aquarius that the water bearer holds, there can be ether, spirit, electricity, there's a frequency, vibration, all of these plasma, all of these different things are in play and are encoded in the symbolism of the vessels that Aquarius holds, right? Or pours. Kind of honestly, the most basic one would be water. It's funny that it's the water bearer, but water in and of itself is obviously very, very mysterious. And there's lots of secrets to water. And just thinking of the idea too, that we come from primordial waters and also return to primordial waters, to me is really interesting. And so, but what I'm trying to say though, with this vessel dynamic, it's endless, that yes, it's a vessel, there's a confined space, but symbolically, it's like an endless cavern, it's this endless well, right? um Even related to the heart, there's a lot of symbolism that correspond the heart to the cave or to the cavern itself, right? um and so, to me, the heart being our symbolic center more than maybe any other organ makes all the sense in the world. In fact, just because I said world, it reminds me of the fact too that there's a lot of places where they refer to it as the heart of the world. They're basically trying to say that whatever that location is, and there's a number of claims to the heart of the world location, they're basically saying this is the center of the world, right? Sometimes it can be referred to as the navel of the world, things like that. Um, but like a lot of very holy places have been referred to as the heart of the world. And so when you're referring to a holy place as well, you're referring to a center for a people. So all people who are of a particular faith, as an example, if you're a Muslim, Mecca is the heart of the world for you. That no matter where you're at, you're going to pray 5 times a day towards Mecca. So what you're basically saying with these locations is that that location actually bridges the gap between heaven and earth, that there is an axis there, that there's a bridge there, that there's something that unifies all that is above with all that is below at that place, right? It's no different than a pillar, basically, which is no different than a spine, right? So any symbol that has this vertical sort of orientation, it's bridging the gap between above and below, between heaven and earth. So as people, as we're walking around, we symbolically are that axis as well, right? The post, the obelisk, the tower, the tree, once again, all of these symbols, it brings us, it actually acknowledges the divine. And people way back in the golden age, in traditional societies, they had more of this vertical orientation, that they wanted to be in touch with the heavens. I would say in today's world, we have much more of this horizontal orientation where everything's sort of flattened out. So there's no hierarchy, right? So the heart being the transcendental sort of space, being this inner sanctum, this holy of holies, right? Being this royal organ, and having all of this royal symbolism. Again, the throne of God, heart being the throne of God, heart being the kingdom of God, right? All of this royal symbolism makes perfect sense because Leo the lion is also this very royal, regal symbol, right? The color gold comes to mind. Gold relates to Sunday. It is Sunday. The lion relates to the sun. Gold is the precious metal king, and so you'd rather have gold than silver or copper or what have you. And so the royal dynamic between heart symbolism and Leo symbolism, there's a complete overlap there. And the other overlap as well is that old kings had this idea of wanting to rule from the center. And so that was of supreme importance to them. And so if you watch my video on the Emperor card, I really get into it there. I've done other presentations where I get into it, but this is a thing that, and this is not just sort of for one culture or one region or whatever. This seems to be fairly universal, that sort of the old idea of being a lord or a king or a leader was that you ruled from the center of your empire and you also ruled from the center of self, which is more of a heart-based connection, right? And so it goes on and on and on and on. But the fact that Leo rules the spine, to me, just plays a part in all of this. And all of this can be referred to as axial symbolism, by the way. So if there's any confusion about that, it's, again, the point of pivot in the middle, the center that everything revolves around, right? And so whether you're talking about a leader, I got into that with my Death in Taurus presentation with the Pope. The Pope was a symbolic living axis, basically. all leaders are symbolically a living axis, pretty much. So the Pope died. They got a new Pope, Pope Leo, by the way. Isn't that kind of interesting? And wherever the Pope goes, that's where everyone goes. Everyone's head is on a swivel because they're looking towards the Pope's direction, because they're looking towards him for direction, for orientation. A lot of this symbolism has to do with orientation, right? So how are you going to be oriented? What are you going to revolve your life around, right? What's your point of pivot? And that's going to say a lot about who you are. For some people, their point of pivot, their point of orientation is all financial. For other people, it's their family. For some people, it's their faith, any number of things, right? For some people, it might be a spiritual leader, that their point of pivot is their spiritual leader, or is something along those lines. Christ, there's a lot of axial symbolism with Christ being that point of pivot or point of orientation. So this is all really interesting as well, because the more I got into polar symbolism, world axis symbolism, and the polar tradition, there's a huge heart-based aspect of the polar tradition. And so, in my opinion, it seems as though we live in a very solarized world. We live in a very solar age. But the oldest age symbolically that I've come across is the polar age. And so there is this great shift from polar symbolism to solar symbolism. And there's deities that were once very polar in nature. And in today's world, people are going to say that they're actually exclusively solar, right? And so this is really, really important stuff. And if you've been following my work, you know that I always talk about this. But one good example of this is actually the god Ptah from ancient Egypt. So there's a book that I read a number of years ago called The Night of the Gods, and by John O'Neill. And basically he says that Ptah, way back when, was viewed as a polar deity. And if you look in today's world, and if you refer to modern researchers, modern Egyptologists, they're going to say that Ptah is just solar, that there is nothing else to be sort of discussed there. And he's saying that Ptah was definitely polar, definitely became solar over time. This book was written in the late 1800s, by the way. And basically, in the polar age or polar tradition, the center was of primary importance for all of the reasons that I've been explaining. And so, again, the center of the body, symbolically, there's a lot of centers, but the heart would be, in my opinion, probably the main one. The center of the heavens would be the pole star. All stars revolve around the pole star. And I thought it was really interesting that Ptah was basically the creator of this domain. And they said that he created it from his heart, basically. So from his center, this polar deity also created all this other stuff, right? And so Ptah has this relationship with the center being a polar god, basically. Now, it's interesting because in today's world, again, I think that we're living in a very solarized world. The sun symbolically is a lot of people's center, right? And so I don't have a concrete, definitive claim about what exactly we live within. I have a lot of opinions. I've said a lot of things over time, but at the end of the day, I know I'm not going to get this grand scale, at least in this life, of what exactly we're living in, how it all sort of plays out, sort of the cosmography of everything. But a lot of people have this idea that the sun is the center of all things. So this is heliocentrism, right? I'm really interested in geocentrism. I think it's fascinating. I think it's fascinating that a lot of our symbolism came from people who had more of a geocentric perspective on things, that they didn't see that the sun was the center of all things. They thought that Earth was. Very, very interesting. More than anything, I'm more interested in this spiritual axis or world axis being the point of pivot for all things, right? But the sun has a lot of center symbolism also associated with it. And what does seem to be the case, right, is that the planets revolve around the sun. And so to the planets, they all revolve around this central point of pivot. And so the sun has a lot of symbolism associated with it, that basically suggests that it's a pole, that it's also an axis, it's the middle of these rotations, of these cycles for these planets. So the planets revolve around the sun, the fixed stars revolve around the pole star. I'm inclined to think personally that we are stationary. It's the heavens above that actually spin. I think that's one of the big inversions behind things. But the idea of the center, though, is so vital and it's so important. I just saw a video on TikTok where the person was saying, and I guess this is modern science for you, but the person was saying that now scientists and things of the sort, that they're basically making the claim now that there is no center to the universe and there is no edge to the universe as well. I think this is completely backwards, personally. And to me, it's part of sort of modernity, really, once again, just kind of screwing with all things traditional, right? And so the idea of there being no center at all, well, then people aren't going to have a point of pivot. People aren't going to have a orientation. People aren't going to be stable. People aren't going to have something to revolve around, right? And so when I heard that yesterday, the day before, I'm like, wow, that's really interesting. But that is how sort of the modern world really works. It's basically it's getting us further and further away from the concept of the center. Although I think a lot of people are really coming around to it and are really becoming interested in it as well. So the heart, the spine, the column, to me, axial symbolism makes sense out of all of it. And the center and traditional symbolism makes sense out of all of it. So I just wanted to put that all out there. Also, specifically, though, the regal royal dynamic of all of the royal symbolism that we associate with gold and the sun and kings and Leo being the king of beasts, that all relates back to the heart as well, right? Once again, the royal organ, in the human body. So that's what I have to say about that. I'm going to check my notes, actually, and see if there was anything else that I sort of left off the table. Even the heart being referred to as the living center, right? Going back to center symbolism. Oh, yeah, maybe I'll just mention this. There's a lot of symbolism associating, well, actually a couple things. There's a lot of symbolism associating the heart with the cup or the chalice. This also relates to the Grail. The quest for the Holy Grail is symbolic. There's a lot of relics that people want to look for physically, right? The ones that come to mind always, the Holy Grail, the Spear of Destiny is another one. The Philosopher's Stone is another one. And certainly there are real objects that have been lost that maybe have really amazing sort of associations and whatnot. But all of these myths or all of these stories, the quest for the Holy Grail, the quest for the Philosopher's Stone, this is the quest towards your center. It's about the inner journey. It's about your inner sanctum. So the Holy Grail is within. It's not something to be found. The Philosopher's Stone is within, and so all of the symbolism, the alchemical symbolism associated with creating a Philosopher's Stone, it's actually about finding it within. That you have to change sort of the symbolism or the metaphor here and understand it that way. You're going to get way more out of that than you will actually trying to create a real Philosopher's Stone. It's intended to be a metaphor. And in fact, I'll say that it seems as though alchemy in general was a system that was all about the inner journey, and it was all having to do with metaphysics, the journey to your center. And at some point, the symbolism became very physical. So then people were kind of obsessed with physical alchemy, doing things in the lab, which predates like chemistry and things like that. I would never tell anybody to not do that stuff or look into it. But the real heart of what alchemy is about is more of a spiritual dynamic and is more of an inner dynamic and has to do with the inner landscape and all of that. Know thyself and you'll know the universe, right? There's a reason why people have repeated that, for centuries now. And so I wanted to mention that. Also, I can't believe I didn't mention this. But there's so much with all of this information. It's wild. But when we're talking about the pillar, when we're talking about the post, when we're talking about the tower or the obelisk, we are talking about the world axis. That all of the symbolism for these things, the tree, it goes back to the world axis, this spiritual axis. And so the pole is also a symbol of this axis, right? Once again, North Pole, pole star, the axis that connects all realms above and below. And so why I bring this up as well is because when you are basically emotionally balanced, you will be following your true north. And that there's a whole relationship with that symbolically. That when you are out of alignment, when you are not centered, you are not going to be living your most authentic life. And so your true north is what gets you closer to that transcendental inner sanctum, which only really you can kind of decide what that is. And even it's not even a decision, I think, in some ways, because I think in a lot of ways, you think this thing that you might acquire or do is going to bring about more of a holistic sort of way, or is going to be the thing that really speaks to your soul. And then you find out it doesn't, you know? And so there's an illusory thing in today's world about looking for your inner sanctum or the thing that kind of makes you tick, right? So to follow your true north is to follow, you know, what dwells at your center, basically. And so the true north, right? Your North Star. To follow your North Star is the same thing. Where does the North Star exist? It exists at the axis or point of pivot in the heavens where the world axis is, basically, where it shoots through symbolically. Also, along with that, there are a number of traditions that associate the lion with the north, and that if there's a directional correspondence, that it's the north, which is the symbolic center of everything here. And so there's more, you know I'm putting it out there that it's all world axis symbolism, it's all polar northern symbolism. That's my thing, that's my perspective. I feel like it's what I'm here to sort of do. But when you also dive into the weeds of lion symbolism, you'll see that this has sort of been a thing for a long time now. So when I've come across that in the past, I'm just like not surprised. Also, just to highlight this pillar dynamic, in case it's really not clear yet, the other ways in which the pillar relates to Leo, just real quick. One, there is a deity in India, Narasimha, and he is an incarnation of Vishnu, if I'm not mistaken. And he kills the father of one of his followers who's evil. And he does this by hiding in a pillar, waiting, if I'm not mistaken, for the father to come home. And then he breaks out of this pillar, and then he basically, murders this guy, and then also eats his entrails. And so, why did he hide within a pillar of all things? That's pretty interesting, right? Also in India, I came across multiple versions of a pillar or a post or a pole, and then it has lions and wheels all around it, right? The wheel is an axial symbol. And so the lion being associated with the pillar, in India, I think is really interesting. Also, you have the story of Samson in the Bible. So Samson wrestled a lion in one of his stories. He had this long, luscious hair. There's a lot of hair symbolism that associates with the lion and with Virgo. And long story short, he ends up being held captive, and he's chained to these pillars. And his enemies are all right there, so he can't, he can't escape. But what he decides to do is that he decides to pull these pillars together. There's two variations that most people talk about. He's either pulling these pillars together or he's pushing these pillars apart. And he basically, by doing that and by having this unbelievable strength, he collapses the whole entire building and everybody dies, including himself. So it's sort of this self-sacrifice kind of thing. And so we're dealing with broken pillars. We're dealing with Samson, which has a ton of Leo symbolism baked into it. Again, he wrestled the lion. And so when you look into it, there's just a number of examples where the pillar is curiously present. Even in Madonna's music video, Like a Virgin, which I've broken down before, if you look at Madonna's video, which Madonna basically means virgin or maiden, which is basically a reference to the Virgin Mary, pretty much. So her name is even a reference to Virgo. She starts off and she's basically walking around, and they start showing these pillars in the video, and then out comes a lion. And she's the Madonna, she's the virgin, and she's talking about being a virgin, being touched for the very first time. And so there's even a guy pursuing her, and he's wearing a lion mask, right? And so in this one video, you have the Leo symbolism, their fondness for virgins. You have the lusty aspect of lion symbolism with the virgin. You have all of the crazy virgin symbolism with Madonna, with just her name, and then also what she's singing about. And then you have all these pillars as well. And so it's really kind of an inseparable sort of dynamic, all of these different things together. So at some point, maybe I'll do a follow-up presentation about all of this. But I see how this all relates together, basically, in a lot of ways. And this is really the time of year to talk about all of that. And Leo, once again, corresponds, thank you, Emily, to the spine, our symbolic pillar within, and also the heart, the symbolic center. And both of these symbols have center symbolism baked into it, right? Even spine, as an example, too, spine is an anagram for penis, which has pillar phallic, associations clearly. And then also the other thing is that spine has pine right there in it. You just remove the S, you have pine, and then we're dealing with more tree phallic sort of pole symbolism, basically. So anyways, I think that's going to do it. So thank you for hanging in there. All right, I'm going to get to my personal stories related to Leo, and then some Q&A stuff. Right, there you go. Sean, Samson ate honey from the carcass of the lion he killed. Yeah, exactly. Okay, I'm just going to check the chat real quick. Thank you, Adam. I appreciate it. Yep. Tate, geocentric equals heart, earth anagram centric. Yeah, totally. There's a lot going on there. Yeah. Too much to dive into further, I think, but people who watch my stuff know what's going on, I think. Or at least know what I'm trying to get at here. Alexis, hello. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I think it's an excellent stream too. I did get a bit of sun today, so I feel like I am feeling that a little bit. But let's plow through here. And I want to get to these personal stories, and then you guys can ask me questions, and I'll answer a few of those questions. So the two big Leo weaves events in my life, just briefly here, because there's so many things I could talk about with it. So in case you weren't aware, I used to run a website called stuffonmycat.com. And last I checked, it's probably still around. I do not own it anymore. I haven't owned it for many, many years. But this website completely changed my life. And it basically came about because I was online and I saw on some message board that this guy had a cat, a particularly lazy cat, and he would put little items on his cat while the cat was sleeping. And I thought it was hilarious. Just little figurines, and I don't even know what else, but a ton of stuff. And the cat wouldn't move like at all. And it was this little game that he used to play with his cat. And I thought, hey, that's pretty funny. I also have a lazy cat. I bet I could do the same thing to my cat sure enough, monkey see, monkey do. I tried it out, and the cat was very patient and did not care at all. And so I did this a few times. I got a kick out of it. I was in my early 20s, by the way. And so I snapped a few photos. I started this website, stuffofmycat.com, and I put it on a message board. And the message board was actually for a cable TV show at the time. And much to my surprise, this cable TV show actually talked about it on air. And they used to talk about random weird websites or social media accounts and whatnot. And so they talked about it, and it completely blew up. And literally, I think I made it in like June or July. And by the end of August, I had a literary agent. I had a book deal. I had all sorts of opportunities that came from that. And the book deal was actually with a really reputable big publisher. And that publisher is Chronicle Books. So if I'm not mistaken, their headquarters is out of the Bay Area, San Francisco. And they do stuff for huge companies and stuff. They put out books for like Disney and whatnot. And the literary agent that I got, at the time, he represented The Onion, which at the time, The Onion was pretty popular as well. And so it completely changed my life. I got this book deal. We ended up doing multiple books. We ended up doing multiple calendars. We ended up doing kind of other side projects under this Stuff on My banner. So we did Stuff on My Mutt. They asked if I wanted to do Stuff on My Baby. I declined that one. But anyway, so the website blew up, and the way I structured it was send me photos of you putting stuff on your cat, and then I will put it on the website, and we would come up with funny captions and everything else. And basically for years, this was my job because it was profitable. There was a lot of momentum. We were getting a ton of traffic. And I didn't realize how big the pet industry really was. And so I kind of, almost like Mr. Magoo or something, I kind of unknowingly waltzed my way into a fairly profitable sort of sector here with pets. And so from there, you know, with the advance money that I got and everything, I opened up a like a warehouse screen printing shop. So I've been a graphic designer for many years, and I was already doing design work by then in my early 20s. And a lot of the clients that I was doing work for, they were bands, record labels, things like that. And all of these people needed merchandise. And so I figured, hey, let's start a screen printing shop. I can still design for my clients. We can also print their shirts in house. And then also we can print shirts for Stuff in My Cat. And that was my thing for a while. We ended up getting, I think, over a handful of years, I counted one time, if I'm not mistaken, we received around like 25,000 photo submissions from people over that time. And they would submit it. And very early on, I learned or realized that I needed to get the rights to use these images. So that was one of the things, is that once you submit it to me, you know, we can use it for publishing purposes and whatnot. And that's what these books were. These books and calendars, it was just photos basically of cats. And I thought it was really funny too, because I, you know, on one hand, I was a published author, and I even got invited to different book fairs to talk about it and whatever. And I just thought it was kind of interesting that they would invite me to talk about my book, but I literally didn't like write a book. And so I just started this website. Meanwhile, I was on panels with people who actually like wrote books. And one of the funny things about it too is that they wanted me to write like an introduction. They're like, okay, it's all photos, but you write the introduction to the book, and you know, we'll go from there. And I've never done anything like this, so I had no idea what to expect. But I wrote an intro. At the time, I thought it was like really good. I thought it was funny, all that kind of stuff. I was proud of it. And I submitted it. And then it came back and it was completely, I mean, they completely butchered it. And they, basically I completely failed. And so they heavily edited my intro and put it in the book. So I just thought that was kind of a fun slap in the face. But this is what I did for a number of years. And like I said, it completely changed my life for a number of reasons. I was able to pay myself or pay my way through college, excuse me. I had a couple of employees. I ran this screen printing shop for a while. It became a thing. Other shows talked about it even, which is surprising. I have it around somewhere. Jon Stewart even made fun of it at one point. There were like well-known people who even visited the site and said that they really liked what I was doing and stuff. So it completely was just this life-altering thing. And then at some point, I kind of got over it and I really wanted to go to film school. And so I decided to move states and then basically stop pursuing Stuff My Cat as like a career. But I designed so many cat shirts and that was my world for a long time that for years, even after the fact, most of my ideas were cat based. And sometimes I still think of cat sort of products or cat designs or whatever. But with Leo season, every time it comes around and every time I'm thinking about cats and whatnot, Stuff on My Cat always comes around too. And I've been surprised at how many people even knew about it. I've met people throughout the years, casually it's brought up or somehow they mention it or something. And I tell them that I ran it. And it was just kind of wild at the time. A lot of younger people were going to have no idea what this is about. I think my audience skews a little bit older anyway, but maybe you've heard about it. So that's my first Leo personal cat story, Stuff My Cat. For years, I didn't want to talk about it online because I just didn't want it to be like a thing. But sure enough, there's been some podcasts that I've been on and people have brought it up and figured it out in one way or another. So that's fun. Let me see here. Hey, what's up? Yes, a book about cats with photos. That was it. Yeah, maybe one day I will gather some of the best photos or take pictures of books. We were actually just home in California, and my mom still has like bins of these books and calendars and t-shirts and all that kind of stuff. So she's hoarding what's left basically. And of course she was very excited for it. Everyone was super supportive, obviously. It even was in Target carried the books for a little while. It was in New Seasons for a little while as well. I think Walmart maybe picked it up for a little bit too. I saw it at like Barnes and Noble when they were around and things like that. So it definitely was it was an interesting experience. And even it's so funny because I've worked on so many projects since then. Nothing has been not even close to being as successful. And I just did that on accident, kind of, it just kind of fell in my lap. I had no idea that it would do anything at all, let alone actually make like real money that would change my life. Not like I have any of that money around. But at the time it allowed me to move and to buy a car and all this other stuff. And, that was the furthest thing from my mind when I first made it and posted it and everything else. So there's something to be said about just following the fun, in some ways. And I knew once I started Symbolic Studies too, I'm like, this is going to be the exact opposite project. This is going to take a long time to get traction. It's a very different kind of project, obviously, but it's just like the complete contrast of everything that I was doing back then. That's kind of how I look at it, personally. Oh, what's up, Alan? I figured as much, actually. Nice to see you. Right. So yeah, Michelle says here, we just uncovered some of Mario's or some of the old relics while visiting Mario's folks. Yeah, totally. What What's up, Almaine? Just got that Baphomet book that you suggested on that Capricorn card stream off the chain. Nice. I'm assuming it's a Tracy Twyman book. Maybe clarify. But I bet it is. Right. So that's one of the things with Leo symbolism and how it might relate to my life. The other thing that I wanted to bring up, less so directly related to like the lion or feline, but you'll see, why this was a significant event. But do you guys remember the eclipse from 2017? I think, did they call that the Great American Eclipse, or was that the last one that went over Texas? But 2017, there was an eclipse, and full totality was going to be not too far from where we lived at the time. And so we decided to go to a park and check things out for ourselves. First eclipse experience, and a lot of people were really excited for it. And also, a lot of people that I was hanging out with, they were really looking into the esoteric aspects of eclipse symbolism and how different cultures saw the eclipse. As an example, there's a whole line of thinking that the eclipse is actually Rahu and Ketu actually like kind of merging together for a second. There's all sorts of stuff that's going on with that, which is also interesting because Rahu and Ketu, that's the head and tail of a dragon, or head and tail of a serpent. And they relate to the nodal points. And the node symbol kind of looks like the Leo glyph, the North Node symbol, if I'm not mistaken. And then you can even see that same symbol on the back of some cobra hoods. So it's this huge weave that I've talked about before. But anyway, very interested in this eclipse and what was to unfold. We went to the park. And long story short, I ended up burning my right eye from looking at the eclipse. And it took me a little while to realize what was going on. I actually don't think I realized until maybe the next day that like I fully realized what had happened. And so full totality came. It's an amazing experience. Obviously, it takes time for that to actually happen. But as, things are sort of merging together, the light that's coming through becomes incredibly bright. And I think at the time, I was looking at this eclipse and I thought that I could just look at it and it wasn't going to be that big of a deal, or that, there was maybe some sort of like meditative kind of thing that I was doing while looking at it. And so I remember looking at it. People have asked me over the years, like, how long were you looking at it for? It's like, I don't know how long. It didn't seem like that long, but it was long enough for there to be damage, And so after the eclipse, I noticed that my vision was kind of off. And I'm like, oh man, I'm still seeing sort of like, when you look at a bright light and then you look into the darkness or something, you can still see that remnant of light. There was kind of that going on. And I remember like trying to blink myself into clarity of vision, and it just wasn't sort of working. And then I remember I was at a coffee shop in Portland, Oregon, and I looked out of the window, and I remember seeing just the little dashes of paint, like the median in between, the two lanes. And I remember looking at it, and it just looked really, really off to me. And so it occurred to me that I should just close one eye. I should close my left eye and my right eye and see if I notice like any difference. And sure enough, that's when I realized that I totally burned, I believe it's called the macula. I burned my macula. And I have a void in the center of my right eye now. So I'm closing my left eye, and there's like a little bit of this like swirly little void thing in my right eye. And it kind of distorts things a little bit. And needless to say, this was devastating. And I couldn't believe it because I'm a graphic designer. And so I've developed a refined eye for design, at least. And I couldn't believe that this was like a completely preventable thing. And it was this sort of event that also just changed everything. And it happened during Leo season because it was August, what was it? August 21st, 2017. So it was at the very tail end of Leo season. And so every single time Leo season comes around, I always think of this. I always think of burning my eye. And since then, I've talked to people online who have also burned their eyes looking at an eclipse. And I've also come across people promoting looking at an eclipse with your naked eye without glasses. And a lot of sun gazers, not all of them, but some sun gazers have talked about this and how there's a unique quality when you're looking at an eclipse, and that sun gazing obviously does have benefits, you know. But anyway, so this was something that was really, really tough for me to deal with for a number of years. And I just couldn't believe it. I was like in disbelief. You know, it also changed certain things with my vision. So my night vision now, not as good as it used to be. Also, too, if I'm out in the sun and I'm getting direct sun and my eyes are closed, like if I'm sunbathing as an example, and I open my eyes, everything is almost it has like a tint of blue to it. It's like a tint of blue, and it's like desaturated as well. And so the color is like sucked out of everything. And so it ends up kind of warming up, and then I could start seeing colors again, you know, after maybe like 30 seconds or something like that. It doesn't take so long. I'm able to see things and all of that. But my vision has just forever changed, basically. But since then, I'll say I don't take my vision for granted. So that's been a huge thing. And overall, I'll say that it was a blessing in disguise, that there were a lot of things that I now take away from it that I'm grateful for, basically. And that's how all sort of ailments work, you know, or all situations like this, that there's actually some sort of silver lining there, you know, that it's actually a gift in disguise. And that's totally, it's become that, basically. But it took me a long time to finally get there, you know, if I'm being honest. And you know, so Leo season, I always think about that. And so so those two things, that's what comes to mind when I think of my personal relationship with Leo, stuff my cat because of the feline thing, and then this eclipse business definitely is another thing. And I do have to say, I just recently got a new license and I had to take an eye test. I didn't know I was going to have to take one, but I did, and I passed. And so that was the first like official real eye test I had taken since that event. And so it's not bad enough to where I can't pass an eye test, but my vision was so sharp ahead of time, I can definitely tell the difference, right? And so there's little details, little things, you know, signs down the way that I can't really read, you know, but, you know, it's just something I have to deal with. And it's something that now in hindsight, it just was like meant to be. It was meant to be for a lot of different reasons. But I've always wanted to kind of really talk about it. And I don't know, I figured now would be a good time. I did make one video about it. I let people know like, hey, because there was the eclipse coming up that was going over Texas and other states. And I just said, hey, I'm like, if you're going to go and check it out, there's some people recommending that you look at it with your naked eye. Feel free, but just know that there are people like myself that thought they could do that too, and it did not work out very well. And so anyway, so there you have it. Okay, so I am going to answer some questions here. So if you guys have any questions in the chat, please let me know, and I will, you know, do my best to answer them. Okay, yep, right on, man. That's awesome to hear. Hey there, Moscow. Welcome, welcome. Short story long, yeah. Sun gazing at sunrise and sunset, I heard, is beneficial for your natural circadian rhythm. Yep. Tina, hey, sorry about the eye. You share amazing work. I appreciate it. On the theme, I just lost my cat on the 29th. Oh, sorry to hear that. Yeah, we don't have a cat right now, but we lost ours a couple of years ago. And I know how tough that can be. So sorry for your loss. Almain, actually, I just got the invite. I've been talking to Rose basically about going back. So honestly, actually, probably sooner than later. So Benjamin Salinas, there's a few mythologies where God loses an eye to gain something else like wisdom. Yeah, exactly. Totally. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Those really resonated very strongly with me through this journey, through this whole entire process, right? Odin is one good example, but yeah, there's a number of them. So there is a mythical, symbolic quality to it that I can appreciate, as tough as it was. Mr. E, thanks, Mario. Great presentation as always, brother. Blessings, fam. Many thanks, dude. Appreciate it. Sarah G, I did look at the 2017 eclipse, but gazing in short bursts, no eye problems, but I'm not recommending it. Yeah, totally. I've talked to people online where they said I had zero issues. And I've talked to, once I made that little video about it, people came out of the woodwork and kind of told me like, hey, same exact thing happened to me. So I totally understand where you're coming from and, all of that. So I don't know what the deal is. There's some theories out there about why some people would be more susceptible to eye damage than not. All right. Right on. Many thanks. So if there's any questions, let me know. All right. Hello, the Metal Valkyrie. With finding your center, what rings true to you? To me, I would say one of the biggest things is being present and presence of mind and heart. And that basically, if you find yourself always thinking about the past, or always thinking about the future, then you're not actually in your center, pretty much. You're elsewhere, basically. And being present is what bridges the gap between past and future. I've said this before. I've said it many times, but this is a quote that I heard that to me was very valuable when I first heard it. But if you find yourself always thinking about the past, you're going to be prone to depression. If you find yourself always thinking about the future, you're going to be prone to anxiety. But if you find yourself in the present moment, you're going to be prone to peace, right? And so to be present is to be centered, right? And I think that's easier said than done in today's world. There's a lot of things here that are basically distracting us from being present, right? I even think as an example of like the 24-hour news cycle and how it's always this like, I was just home, right, with my folks, and we don't really watch the news here, but back home, I see a lot of the news. And it's like literally, it's just like all of these terrible sort of things just being blasted all over the news, wars and sort of like floods and fires and car accidents and stabbings and robbings and, all of these different things. And to me, it's just one of these things where that's going to put you in fight or flight pretty much, and so it keeps you from being present and centered, in my opinion. And so the 24-hour news cycle too, with so much news all the time, and with the way social media is, there's so much to keep up with all the time. I think it's keeping people from being present. And I think in today's world, a lot of people are kind of fixated with the future. And I'll say that with astrology too, a lot of people tend to be fixated on the future as well, because people are always looking at what's happening tomorrow, next week, next month, things like that. And modern astrologers have a tendency to want to be very predictive, and they want to be right in their predictions. And so they're constantly always forecasting, and they're always looking ahead. And so I'm not opposed to divination like that entirely, but I think that you can get lost in that. And so if you're always thinking ahead, also, I'll just say a lot of like truther, conspiratorial type people, same exact thing. So it's not just astrologers, but a lot of people in that world, in that community, at least this is my experience, a lot of these people are perpetually thinking about the future. What's going to happen next week, next month? It's always about what's around the corner, but it's never about what's happening like right now, And so to me, being present is one way of connecting with your center for sure. Um, I don't know if it's appropriate, but maybe some thoughts on having Chiron in Leo on the natal chart. Thank you. Interesting. I may not be the best person to ask that question, but there are some things that come to mind. Absolutely. As an example, if I'm just looking at the themes, that relate Chiron to Leo, or how those two kind of maybe interact with each other. One of the things with Leo that I think about is this child dynamic. And so, as an example, like on the strength card, you are seeing like a mother and child sort of relationship. You have Virgo and then you have Leo, or the lion. And so you have mother and child, no different than the Virgin Mary and Christ being the Lion of Judah. Christ also having all this solar symbolism associated with it. Leo having this solar symbolism, obviously very strongly related to it. And so the lion, symbolically, there is this childlike sort of energy there because of the solar associations. And the sun is called the sun, right? S-U-N, but also, it sounds exactly like S-O-N. And so the sun symbolically is a sun, in many ways. And so that's why on the sun card, you actually see a child. You're either going to see two children and they're holding hands in front of a brick wall, or they're holding a ribbon together, something like that. Or you're going to see a child on a horse in front of a brick wall. And the child dynamic, this is the only traditional tarot card where you're going to see a child, is the sun card, right? And so when I think of the sun card and I think of solar symbolism as it relates to Leo, there's a lot of childlike stuff that comes to mind. As an example, I always bring up the word potential, and how children are beautiful because they have their whole life ahead of them. And so all of this potential is there. And everyone sort of just innately understands that. Oh, you can become anything you want. They can do great things. They haven't really been conditioned by the real world yet. They haven't really been beaten down quite yet. And so they have their whole life ahead of them. And so we like to think of these children as being, as becoming the greatest versions of themselves that they can possibly be. Right. And so our jobs as adults is to, in many ways, sort of like foster that and protect that. And so I think of the childlike innocence that we all have and had. And I also think of our inner child wanting to come out with the sun card. I've noticed that with readings. That's something that I've come across multiple times, where it seems like sometimes it can be a dead ringer that your inner child wants to come out and play, and that it's really easy in today's world to kind of ignore that side of self, to maybe not be curious, to not like wonder, to not even just play, but to always just like work, and, just be responsible and whatever else. And so when I think of Chiron symbolism, one of Chiron's main wounds, his earliest wound, was being abandoned by his parents. And so that's sort of one of the invisible wounds that he had to deal with. And so I think of the nature of trauma, and I think about how much, how many people have to deal with childhood trauma, basically, and how there is a sort of unbroken chain of trauma, you can say, where there's people who are full full grown adults, and they go through something traumatic, that they maybe get into a car accident, or, something happens. And this can sometimes, basically unlock all sorts of memories for them that relate to earlier traumas. And so there's people that I've heard that have had some major ailment or issue that they've dealt with. And then, over time, as they're sort of trying to heal, they realize that they have all this other healing to do from like their teen years or from their childhood or something like that. And so there's sort of this, like I'm saying, this unbroken chain of trauma, that new traumas can basically be related to old traumas, even though they seem like they're completely, not related. And so with Chiron, I just think that there's such a strong, potent aspect to this original abandonment issue that Chiron had, that he had to transmute and had to work through. That just the nature of childhood trauma and of childhood just in general to me comes to mind personally when I'm thinking about all of this stuff. And so I'm not, there's other natal chart astrologers who would probably have way more to say about all of that. But the nature of your child and then dealing with maybe potential struggles and potential hangups and whatnot, to me seems like it's in play there. But that's just the first thing that comes to mind personally. If anyone else has any thoughts on that, obviously, please share. Benjamin, what have you found in your studies about Sirius that makes you believe that's what these constellations are being praised or worshipped today by many? Right. Okay. So Sirius is a really interesting star. And obviously this is like an appropriate time to talk about Sirius too. So, I mean, the main thing, if you've never heard of the heliacal rising of Sirius, definitely look into that. Because if I'm not mistaken, that is literally the beginning of Leo season. And so the rising of Sirius was considered to be a really, really important time of year for a lot of cultures. Like I know, like in ancient Egypt, it was definitely a thing. And so that time of year, the transition from Cancer to Leo is really interesting. There's a lot of different transitions from sign to sign that carry a lot of like symbolic weight. And the one from Cancer to Leo is huge. And so you have the heliacal rising of Sirius. You also have the sign in Cancer that is ruled by the moon, followed by the sign that is ruled by the sun, Leo. These are the only two signs ruled by the sun and also ruled by the moon, and they happen to be right next to each other. And then you have this interesting contrast as well between water and fire and all these other things. Sirius is really bright. That's something just to kind of acknowledge, just, whatever, openly, that it's so bright is kind of unavoidable. It's also right along this line of all these amazing stars and constellations and asterisms. It's actually one of my favorite parts of the night sky. You have Taurus. I'm just visualizing it, but in Taurus, you have the Pleiades, the asterism within Taurus in the upper right, just above Taurus. And then within Taurus, you've got Aldebaran, which is a royal star, massive star. And then further down from there, you have Orion, and then you have Orion's belt, which is obviously really recognizable. And then even further down, you actually have Sirius. And so just this like cross section, or almost this line through the heavens, super potent, super powerful. And in a way, it kind of ends, or you could say begins, with Sirius. That Sirius kind of begins or ends this line, which is, I think, is kind of interesting too, because it's the dog star. And what you realize about canine symbolism, dog symbolism, isn't this interesting as well, right? That we have the heliacal rising of Sirius during Leo season, during the time of the cat. And so we have this dog and cat dynamic with this time of year as well. And in case people aren't aware, this is kind of common knowledge now, but we refer to the dog days of summer because of Sirius, the dog star. But when you get into canine symbolism, also interesting, K9, and then you have the 9 with the cat, right? The 9 lives of the cat. You'll find that a lot of dogs actually like lead the way. And so there's a lot of stories where the dog leads the way and is like ahead of the pack. My favorite example of this is actually The Wizard of Oz with Toto. Toto leads the way for the whole entire movie. Toto is actually sort of like an initiator in many different ways. And Toto is the one that basically progresses the story along. You also have, in the tarot, you have the Rider-Waite version and other versions where the dog is sort of yapping at the fool. And this is kind of related to a similar idea that the dog leads the way. That the dog, oftentimes, obviously, when you see people walking their dog, the dog is ahead. The dog is leading the way, right? And so the fool doesn't know that he's about to step off a cliff. And so the dog is trying to warn him, hey, you're about to step off this cliff. The fool is so present. He has this presence of mind that I was talking about, that he's unaware of sort of the potential dangers right before him because he's just in his own space right then and there. But the dog is aware because the dog is always leading the way. And so you can look at it as related to that. And actually, people have said that literally when you're looking at the Fool card and the dog is right next to the Fool, that basically you are looking at Sirius as it relates to Orion, and that the Fool is actually Orion. And so I think that Sirius symbolism has a lot to do with Orion just based off of proximity. But what I've also heard too is that, I mean, long story short, in my personal opinion, just like I was talking about hierarchy, there's a real hierarchy in the heavens. And the top of the hierarchy is the center of the Wheel of Heaven, which would be the pole star. And so I make the claim that all other stars are subordinate to the pole star, that the pole star is sort of like the king of stars, right? It's even been said that the king's throne exists in the northern sky. And this is whether or not you think the pole star changes over time with the precession of the equinoxes, or if you think it is stationary. That if it changes over time, the star that's closest to that axis point is now the new pole star. And the pole star is kind of like a title. It's almost like giving a person the title of king, even though there have been many kings before it. They're still the current king, right? And so the pole star is kind of the king. And so all of the other stars are underneath sort of its authority. And so there is no higher point in the heavens, in my opinion, than the center of the heavens, where all of the fixed stars revolve around and they go counterclockwise around the pole star. So I bring this up because I think that all of the other stars, all of the other fixed stars, and I would even say the wandering stars, the planets, that their symbolism basically comes from pole star symbolism. That the pole star, literally, it's like the tippy top of a pyramid. And if everything descends down from there, that means that everything else underneath it is beholden to that apex at the very top. So I would say that all stars have a relationship with the pole star. So including Sirius. Sirius revolves around the pole star just like every star, all the fixed stars do, right? Once again, the wandering stars, the planets, they actually go around the sun. And so one thing that I've read is that Sirius and the pole star are just far enough in our vision, which if you're breaking it down like in camera terms or lens terms, my understanding is that our vision is equivalent to like a 50 millimeter lens, right? Which is like a really standard lens. So it's not super wide and it's not super like telephoto. And so a 50 millimeter lens, that if you look into the heavens, the dog star and the pole star are right on the edges of our vision. And I have read that there is a relationship with the pole star and the dog star, and that the dog star basically is subordinate to the pole star, and that there's a hidden relationship there. But I found that with a lot of other stars as well. And so this is just kind of what I'm recalling off the top of my head. But I know Kenneth Grant talks a lot about Sirius in some of his books. And if I'm not mistaken, he's the one who put me onto the pole star Sirius sort of connection. And that Sirius has kind of been viewed as a almost like a child of the pole star, basically, or a child of Ursa Major, pretty much. And I know that this gets really into the weeds with stuff, but there's a connection with Set as well, the Egyptian Set with the pole star, and then also Sirius. So those are the things off the top of my head that I can think of. So it's a multi-layered, multifaceted sort of thing, basically. So hopefully that helps. All right, let me see here. Also, just want to say that, you know, when people have a reverence for a particular star or a reverence for a particular constellation, generally the symbolism really overlaps with a lot of other constellations. Not literally like, you know, the animal it's associated with or whatever, but like a good metaphor would be, you know, there's a lot of claims to the center of the earth, right? The heart of the world. And there's a lot of pilgrimage locations around the world. And all pilgrims will say the same thing about this about their pilgrimage location. They'll say something along the lines of, this is where heaven and earth meet. This is where the bridge exists between the above and below. And so none of those people are wrong. So if you think your pilgrimage location is in Israel versus if you think it's in South Africa versus if you think it's wherever, they all have the same sort of thing to say, that this is a divine place, right? That something really special happened here. That's transcendental, right? That's what people say about all these constellations, and that's what people say about all these stars, right? A lot of these stars are like, this is where our ancestors come from. This is the gate to heaven. This is the gate to the other side. There's a portal there. There's a gateway there, or whatever. And what I've come to the conclusion of is that a lot of that symbolism was originally attached, and I think in the golden age, primarily attached to the pole star, whatever the pole star might be at the time. That was the central gate. That was the central bridge that related to the middle path. It related to all of these different things. And so what happened over time was that now this central bridge that has this relationship with the spiritual axis or world axis, the axis mundi, that symbolism now shifted to everywhere else around the heavens. So now every constellation kind of has that same claim, or every star or royal star or whatever has very similar things sort of attached to it. So I'm no longer surprised when I hear about, oh, this star is a gateway. That constellation is a portal, whatever. And it's just like, well, I don't disagree with that, but they all have this unified sort of origin story, basically. And I'm inclined to think Sirius is related to that as well. All right, what does Sean say? The past is gone, the future is uncertain. The now in the moment is a gift. That's why it's the present. Yeah, exactly. The eternal now, for sure. Hey there. Thanks for being here. Yep, you got it. Dog and God, they lead the way. Haha, yep. Thank you, Mario. Appreciate what you do, brother. You got it. For sure. That's what I'm here for. All right. So 3 questions. Okay, let's see what I can do here. Books on astrological symbols or recommendations. For that one, I will say I have several book recommendation videos. Just type in book on my channel. Maybe if Michelle is still here, maybe she can find a couple and just repost those. So definitely check those out. I also have a list. If you're specifically interested in polar symbolism, I have a list on my website. You just click the top banner and it's a PDF of I think it's 27 books. Any meditations or exercises you would recommend? I can't say that I do have any recommendations on that end, but thank you for asking, for sure. Advice for a Leo moon, 8th house, Cancer sun, 7th house, Capricorn ascendant. Unfortunately, not so much a natal chart astrologer off the cuff, personally. So I wish I could totally dive into that for you, but that's not really my world. Definitely more interested in the sort of symbolic encodings of the signs and all that other stuff. I do, however, do natal chart readings for people, but I definitely need my time to spend with your chart and really look at it and digest and contemplate and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I'm glad you asked either way. The Sirius Orion line points to Andromeda, our sister galaxy. There you go. Yeah. You got it. Okay, so yeah, man. Right. So what I'm going to do here is if there's any other questions, I'll answer after I kind of plug some of this stuff at the end of the stream here. So once again, I will be in North Carolina, Spartanburg, North Carolina, for the Esoterica event. I am doing a live presentation, live lecture. I'm also doing tarot readings. Would love to hang out and meet some people for sure. So that's October 17th through 19th. Michelle will be with me, who is my co-host for the podcast, right? So if you haven't heard the Leo season podcast, definitely give that a go. In case you weren't aware, by the way, it's available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. You could even just go to my website, and I always have the latest episode on my site, so you can just listen to it there. But this is, I believe, our 7th episode, and I think we kind of cracked the code with the format a little bit too, just getting into things a little bit quicker. I don't know. I think that's the way to go. So give that a listen. And then also Virgo voicemails. So if you're interested in submitting a voicemail for Virgo season, the Virgo season podcast, the deadline is Saturday the 23rd. And so basically, if you're going to submit something, I want a voicemail up to 2 minutes long. So I want these to be nice and short and concise. I want your best insights on the sign. And I think it's going to be a really good one. I really have a fondness for Virgo for sure. So there's a lot to talk about with that. Also, Patreon. So patreon.com/symbolic studies, or you can go to my site, symbolicstudies.com/secrets, and basically sign up for a membership on either platform. And you get the same exclusives. You get my Symbolic Secrets episodes, and then you also get the podcast a week early. I also, I send out like a weekly update basically every weekend. Currently working on the Tower card episode. I believe this is our 17th episode. So that means that there's like 17 hours of exclusive content presentations on the Major Arcana. I'm going through the whole entire Major Arcana. So I have literally an episode for the full all the way up to the Tower card. So I'm going to do the whole Major Arcana. And then after that's done, I might tackle the minor cards. I'm not really sure, but doing the Major Arcana made all the sense in the world. So it's really like my most deep divey information on every single card, basically. And I've got a ton of slides for each one. It's a good time. I've gotten a great response from people. So membership is just $5 a month. It's a great way to support the channel as well, of course. Another great way to support the channel, if you're interested in a tarot reading or a private lesson, I am available for that. Just a heads up. So it is, at the time of this recording, it's August 10th. I think I'm basically booked out until late September. So if people want to book something, and if you're looking for something like in the fall, then now is like the time to book, basically. So I'm usually like a month to 2 months out, so definitely check that out. My hourly rate for a tarot reading is $80. Same thing with a private lesson. The private lesson basically is a custom lesson just for you. We get together, we get online together, and we talk about whatever it is you're interested in. I've had people reach out and they want insights on their artwork. People have had dreams that they've wanted me to analyze. People have had tarot readings that they've done for themselves, but they want more insights on the cards. People have wanted to learn the tarot. One of my favorite things actually has been working with artists. Yeah, artists that are doing a series, and they just want to refine the symbolism of their series just a little bit. I can offer a lot of insights with all of that. I've been a lifelong designer and artist, right? So the realm of art is absolutely in my wheelhouse. And speaking of which, once again, I'm a graphic designer. If you have a project that you think I would be a good fit for, then reach out. If you want a symbolically literate designer, I think I'm your guy. And I have to say that easily the coolest clients I've ever had in my life have come through Symbolic Studies, because they know where I'm at with symbolism. They know where I'm at with a lot of things. So I feel like it's just, I don't know, we're able to go deeper basically. And also, I will say, one of the unintended kind of consequences with doing design work for Symbolic Studies people is it's basically like we're doing, every meeting is almost like a symbolic lesson pretty much. And so every single client that I've worked with, we're able to really dive into the weeds with symbolism with their project, whatever that project might be, right? And so that has been very fulfilling for me on a lot of different levels. And I've gotten really good feedback from people as well. You could even see my portfolio on my site. So go to symbolicstudies.com. There is an art and design section, and then there's a link to my portfolio if you want to see the kind of art that I do create. So I've even, I've kind of considered offering maybe a package deal with like logos or something for people who are wanting to also learn symbolism along the way, right? Either way, we're going to talk about stuff. And so if you're into symbolism, you'll probably get a lot out of collaborating together, if I'm being honest with you. Okay, so I think actually that's going to do it. I'm going to see if there's any other questions, and then I'm going to get out of here. All right, so Michelle is posting stuff. Right. So Spartanburg, South Carolina. There we go. All right. Right. So esoterica.world is the website once again for that. So my bad. So South Carolina, not North Carolina. But anyway, thank you guys so much for hanging out and supporting the channel. I will be back for another live stream, definitely with Virgo season, perhaps, a bit sooner. We shall see. But until then, you guys be well and take care. See ya.